asked Bruce, well, who wins, Bruce? He says, I win. I'm the star of this movie. So, which I knew he was going to say. And I said, yeah, I see.
When Sylvester Stallone, Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Dolph Lundgren gathered to honor Chuck Norris, the moment quickly turned emotional. These legendary action stars, known for strength and toughness, struggled to hold back tears. For decades, they stood side by side as icons of a powerful era. But this tribute revealed something deeper. Behind the fame and fierce roles was a bond few truly understood. What made this farewell so moving? And what does it reveal about the man they came to honor? Tribute to Chuck Norris. On the morning of March 20th, 2026, messages began arriving from every corner of the world. They came slowly at first, then in waves, unstoppable in their tide. They were words of grief, of admiration, of love, and they all carried the same truth: Chuck Norris was gone. Among the first to speak publicly was Sylvester Stallone, a man whose own life and career had been built on the mythology of strength, courage, and the American hero. Stallone was more than a colleague. He was a contemporary, a man who had spent decades shaping the image of toughness on screen. And yet, when he spoke of Chuck, it was not with exaggeration or ceremony. His words were precise, honest, and deeply personal. Stallone had a unique connection to Chuck. He had created the Expendables franchise to reunite the legendary titans of action cinema. The stars who had once dominated Hollywood screens with fists, courage, and charisma. In 2012, Stallone personally called Chuck, convincing him to return to the screen. Their reunion was captured in a photograph posted on Instagram. A moment frozen in time. Two men in their prime, side by side, embodying the energy, the toughness, and the spirit of an era that had shaped a generation. I had a great time working with Chuck, Stallone wrote. He was all-American in every way, great man, and my condolences to his wonderful family. It was a simple message, but coming from Stallone, a man who had spent 50 years living and breathing the American hero, it carried immense weight. The phrase, all-American in every way, was not a cliché. It was a declaration, a recognition from one craftsman to another. Chuck Norris had not merely acted as an American hero, he had lived it, in every sense of the word. Jean-Claude Van Damme's tribute arrived next, gentle and tender, shaped by a deep, lifelong friendship rather than rivalry or professional admiration. Van Damme, the Belgian fighter, whose own Hollywood legend was built on lightning-fast reflexes, fluidity, and athletic grace, had crossed paths with Chuck long before their shared scenes in The Expendables 2. In the early days of Hollywood, the martial arts community was small, tight-knit, and defined by mutual respect. Chuck had been a guiding presence long before Van Damme arrived, a living proof of what dedication, skill, and discipline could achieve. On Instagram, Van Damme wrote openly, "His heart and guard laid bare. Deepest condolences on the passing of my friend, Chuck Norris. We knew each other from my early days, and I always respected the man he was. My heart and prayers are with his family. He will never be forgotten." Those final 4 words, "He will never be forgotten," carried a promise. They were not the polite formality of a public statement. They were a commitment from one man who had seen greatness to another who had defined it. Dolph Lundgren had admired Chuck long before they ever met. The Swedish-born actor and martial artist, a man of extraordinary physical gifts and genuine academic achievement, had grown up watching Chuck as a living example of what was possible. To Lundgren, Chuck was proof that mastery of martial arts and commanding screen presence could coexist. You did not have to sacrifice authenticity to be entertaining. You did not have to choose between being real and being watchable. When Lundgren finally shared the screen with Chuck in The Expendables 2, something within him shifted. It was as if a circle had been completed. He paid tribute in the longest and most personal message of the three. Chuck Norris is the champ. Ever since I was a young martial artist and later got into movies, I always looked up to him as a role model, someone who had the respect, humility, and strength it takes to be a man. We will miss you, my friend. 3 words: respect, humility, strength, summed up decades of observation. Lundgren had not seen these qualities in press releases or staged interviews. He had seen them in the quiet moments, the private rooms, the unrecorded corners where Chuck carried himself with dignity. The champ, Lundgren called him, not the star, not the icon. One fighter acknowledging another. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had spent 40 years moving alongside Chuck in the world of American action cinema, posted next. He wrote with the straightforward honesty of a man who knew that some losses could not be softened with flowery words. Chuck was an icon. I am grateful that I was able to work with him in multiple ways over the years, from promoting fitness to sharing the screen together. He was a badass in real life and in Hollywood. His legend will be with us forever. My thoughts are with his family. To Arnold, calling Chuck a badass was not casual. It mattered because Arnold understood the difference between pretending to be tough and actually being tough. Chuck had been genuinely formidable. From martial arts mats in South Korea to the backlots of Hollywood to the Texas ranch where he trained into his 80s. Toughness had never been a costume. It was woven into the man himself. Even Priscilla Presley, who had trained in Chuck's dojo in the early 1970s, shared her grief with heartfelt simplicity. I'm so sad to hear that my karate instructor and friend, Chuck Norris, has passed away. He will be forever missed. 2 words, instructor and friend, captured the essence of how Chuck touched the lives of those around him. Every tribute carried the same underlying truth. Chuck Norris was more than an icon. However, his life had been felt in the quiet discipline of a dojo, the roar of a movie set, and the shared admiration of colleagues and friends who had known him as few others could. How did he rise to fame? Did he have it easy from childhood? Let's find out. The rise of Chuck Norris. In a small, quiet town in southern Ryan, Oklahoma, where only a few hundred people lived and dusty roads stretched between simple homes, life moved slowly. The silence there was deep, so deep that it seemed to settle inside a child and stay with them forever. It was in this quiet place, on March 10, 1940, that Chuck Norris was born as Carlos Ray Norris. There were no celebrations or grand beginnings. Instead, he entered a world already weighed down by struggle. His family was doing its best just to survive. His father, Ray Norris, had returned from World War II carrying invisible scars. Though he worked many jobs, mechanic, bus driver, truck driver, he never seemed to stay in one place for long. His life drifted, and alcohol followed him everywhere like a shadow. It crept into his home, into arguments, and into the long absences that left his family feeling uncertain and alone. In sharp contrast stood his mother, Wilma. She was strong, determined, and deeply faithful. Where her husband struggled, she stood firm. She was the kind of woman who refused to let her family fall apart, no matter how hard things became. With quiet strength and constant effort, she held everything together, even as her husband slowly slipped further away. Carlos was the oldest of 3 boys. His younger brothers, Wieland and Aaron, looked up to him the way younger siblings often do, with silent hope that he would somehow know what to do, how to lead, how to make things better. But the truth was, he didn't have any answers. There was no clear path in front of them, no guide to follow. There was only endurance, getting through one day at a time. When his parents finally divorced, the family broke apart. Wilma gathered her sons and moved them away, first to Prairie Village, Kansas, and later to Torrance, California. She was chasing something simple but powerful, the hope of a better life, a fresh start, far from the struggles they had known. By then, Carlos was a teenager. He was quiet, shy, and often withdrawn. In school, he was the kind of boy who blended into the background, rarely noticed, rarely called upon. He wasn't the loudest, the most popular, or the most confident. In fact, he would later admit that he often felt invisible, as if he didn't truly belong anywhere. But inside him, something was growing. It wasn't weakness, it was patience, discipline, and quiet determination. These qualities hadn't yet found a purpose, but they were there, building slowly beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. That moment began in 1958, when at just 18 years old, he made a practical decision that would change his life. He joined the United States Air Force. It wasn't a dramatic choice. It was simply the decision of a young man searching for direction, structure, and a way forward. He was sent far from home to Osan Air Base in South Korea, where he worked as an air policeman. And it was there, on the other side of the world, that everything began to change. In Korea, he was given a new name. Fellow servicemen started calling him Chuck, a nickname that would stay with him for the rest of his life, long after the fame, the films, and the championships. But Korea gave him something even more important than a name. It introduced him to Tang Soo-do. He discovered it almost by accident, watching local practitioners train with incredible focus and precision. There was something about it, the calm before movement, the discipline, the deeper philosophy, that spoke to something inside him. It reached the quiet, uncertain boy he had always been. He began to train, and when he did, he gave it everything. Hour after hour, day after day, he pushed himself harder than anyone expected. His dedication surprised even his instructors. For the first time in his life, he had found something that gave him purpose. By the time he left the Air Force in 1962 as an airman first class, he was no longer invisible. He had changed. He had discovered something that made him feel strong, focused, and fully present in his own life. Returning to California, he opened a small martial arts studio in Torrance. It wasn't glamorous, just a modest space with a small group of students. He was teaching something most people around him barely understood, something from a distant country many couldn't even point to on a map. At first, success didn't come easily. He entered competitions and lost to fighters like Joe Louis and Alan Steen. But he didn't let those losses defeat him. Instead, he studied them carefully, learning from every mistake. He broke down each failure, improved, and returned stronger. Then, in 1967, everything changed. He fought his way through 7 opponents in a row to win his first major title. It was the beginning of something remarkable. From 1968 to 1974, he dominated the karate world, holding the professional middleweight championship without losing once. For 6 straight years, he remained unbeaten. It wasn't just a winning streak. It was a powerful statement about who he had become. Along the way, his martial arts studio began attracting well-known students. People like Steve McQueen, Priscilla Presley, the Osmonds, and Bob Barker came to train with him. For many of them, the bruises they earned during training became something to be proud of, a sign that they had experienced the discipline and intensity of Chuck Norris firsthand. How did Chuck Norris become Hollywood's action hero? How was his journey from dojo to box office? Let's find out. The Lone Warrior. The first time Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee shared the same room, something unusual happened. They didn't see each other as rivals or competitors. Instead, they saw a kindred spirit. Two men who had poured every ounce of themselves into martial arts, to the point where the discipline wasn't just something they did, it was who they were. In the mid-1960s, they began training together. Their sparring was intense, respectful, and precise, and it forged a bond that lasted until Bruce Lee's untimely death in 1973. It was Bruce Lee who first brought Chuck onto a film set. In 1972, he invited him to play the main villain in The Way of the Dragon, in a climactic showdown in the Roman Colosseum. On screen, their fight was flawless. Every move calculated, authentic, and powerful, requiring no camera tricks because the skill was real. Chuck lost the fight as the story demanded, but off-screen, he gained something far more valuable. The world finally saw him. His face, his movements, his presence. Among the viewers was Steve McQueen, actor, legend, and one of Chuck's most devoted martial arts students. After the film, McQueen pulled Chuck aside. He told him that if he applied the same dedication to acting that he had given to martial arts, he could succeed. McQueen saw something in Chuck's bearing, his quiet strength, and the way he commanded a room. This wasn't flattery. It was a professional judgment from one expert to another. He began acting classes and approached them with the same methodical discipline he brought to martial arts. In 1977, he landed the lead in Breaker, a low-budget action film about a truck driver searching for his missing brother in a corrupt small town. Shot in just 11 days, the film made money and caught Hollywood's attention. Good Guys Wear Black followed in 1978, and then a string of hits in the early 1980s. A Force of One, The Octagon, An Eye for an Eye, and Lone Wolf McQuade. These films cemented his on-screen identity. The Lone Warrior, a man of few words, devastating action, and a cause worth fighting for. The partnership with Cannon Films, led by the tireless producers Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus, transformed Chuck from an action star into a cultural icon. They understood the early 1980s audience perfectly, people craving stories of American courage and triumph after difficult years like Vietnam and the Iran hostage crisis. Chuck Norris became a symbol of that resilience. Missing in Action, 1984, struck a chord, presenting Colonel James Braddock as a one-man army refusing to leave his men behind, a fantasy of national redemption. Audiences cheered not just for the hero, but for the idea that a single determined individual could right historical wrongs. Sequels followed, then Code of Silence, 1985, a gritty Chicago police thriller widely praised by critics, and The Delta Force, 1986, co-starring Lee Marvin, which brought Chuck into counterterrorism action with bigger budgets and broader scope. Between 1984 and 1988, Chuck starred in 8 films for Cannon, 8 in 4 years. The pace was relentless, the work extraordinary, and the cultural impact massive. Unlike the Austrian accent of Schwarzenegger, the wisecracks of Willis, or Seagal's technique, Chuck's difference was authenticity. When he fought on screen, it felt real. Not because the stunts were dangerous, but because he had trained thousands of hours, competed at the highest levels, and faced the greatest martial artists of his time. Where others relied on spectacle, humor, or gimmicks, Chuck Norris offered credibility. How did Chuck Norris redefine action and inspiration? What was the strength behind the icon? Let's take a closer look. Chuck Norris TV legacy. By the close of the 1980s, Chuck Norris's movies had pulled in over $500 million worldwide. His name had become a symbol of a kind of toughness the world couldn't get enough of. But this was just the beginning. Norris was about to enter a new chapter of his life, one that would make him even more admired in ways most people never expected. By the early 1990s, the golden age of blockbuster action films had ended. Studios that once seemed unstoppable buckled under their own ambition, and Hollywood's landscape shifted beneath the feet of the very men who had defined it. Arnold Schwarzenegger began leaning into humor and self-parody. Bruce Willis dove deeper into his franchise roles, and Chuck Norris, who had never cared much for the glare of celebrity, made a choice that surprised almost everyone in the business. He moved to Texas, not to retire, not to fade away, but to create something entirely new. He wanted a project built on the values he had lived by his entire life. That vision became Walker, Texas Ranger, which premiered on CBS in 1993. What started as a modest gamble turned into one of the longest-running and most watched action dramas in American television history. For 8 seasons, across 200 episodes, Cordell Walker, a martial artist, a man of principle, a Texas Ranger, rode into living rooms every Saturday night like a familiar, trusted neighbor. By today's standards, the show was far from sophisticated. It did not dwell on moral gray zones or complex storylines. Instead, it offered something far simpler and far more valuable to its audience: clarity. Good and evil were clear. Justice could be achieved, and the man delivering it was someone you could completely trust. For tens of millions of viewers, Chuck Norris was not playing a hero. He was the hero. The quiet strength, unwavering morals, and readiness to act where others hesitated were not performances. They were reflections of the man himself. Co-stars and crew often described him in the same way: humble, professional, kind, and completely without pretense. Judson Mills, who played his partner Francis Gage, later said that Chuck Norris was one of those rare people who truly lived up to his legendary image. Quiet, wise, gentle, yet towering in presence, and somehow able to make everyone around him feel comfortable. These words were not for a eulogy. They were memories, built from years of seeing who he was when the cameras stopped rolling. But during these years, Chuck Norris was doing more than building a television legacy. He was laying the groundwork for something that would outlive any show or screen credit. In 1990, he founded Kickstart Kids, a nonprofit organization bringing martial arts training to middle and high schools across Texas, especially in communities where guidance was scarce and danger was nearby. The philosophy behind it was simple yet powerful. Discipline is not punishment. It is a gift. By giving young people a practice that demands their full attention, effort, and commitment, you give them the tools to shape a life worth living. By the time of his passing, Kickstart Kids had reached tens of thousands of children. No cameras, no big promotions, just Chuck quietly living his beliefs. Faith ran through everything he did. Chuck Norris was a devout Christian, and he spoke about it openly, without showmanship. He wrote books on the subject and wove his beliefs into the values he championed publicly and privately. Faith was not a costume for the cameras or a brand for political audiences. It was the foundation of his life. It shaped how he understood his humble beginnings, the discipline he had learned, the successes he had achieved, and the responsibilities that came with them. And then, in a way the world couldn't have predicted, the internet discovered him. What impact did he have on the internet? Did he attract online fans, like in his early career days? Let's take a closer look. Chuck Norris memes. In 2005, a wave of jokes started spreading across the internet called Chuck Norris Facts. The idea was simple but impossible to resist. Wildly exaggerated stories about his toughness, told straight-faced and getting more ridiculous by the second. Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down. He counted to infinity twice. Even death had a near Chuck Norris experience. The jokes exploded online faster than anyone expected, including Chuck himself. What started as humor in college dorms quickly became a global phenomenon, a playful mythology celebrating him. These jokes weren't mean or cruel. They were a strange kind of tribute. People recognized that Chuck had become more than a movie star. He had become a symbol. Toughness so complete, it looped back into comedy. Chuck embraced the humor fully. He went on talk shows, reading the jokes with a straight face and a playful glint in his eye. He officially licensed the memes and used them in public appearances, showing that he could laugh at himself in a way few action heroes ever could. What these memes achieved, what no studio marketing could do, was introduce Chuck Norris to a whole new generation. Teenagers who'd never seen Missing in Action shared his jokes. College students who were born after Walker, Texas Ranger went off the air instantly knew his name as shorthand for unbeatable strength. His legend didn't fade. It was renewed, preserved digitally, made permanent. Chuck didn't chase immortality. He simply lived in a way that made it inevitable. Before the losses came, though, there was one final, unforgettable moment. In 2012, Sylvester Stallone reached out with an invitation that felt less like a movie offer and more like a reunion. The Expendables 2 was bringing together the greatest action heroes on one screen. Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Jason Statham, Jet Li, and now, after 7 years away from Hollywood, Chuck Norris. Since the late 1990s, Chuck had mostly stayed on his Texas ranch, focusing on family, faith, and his foundation. The movie world had moved on, but Stallone understood something the industry sometimes forgets. True legends grow, even in absence. When Chuck stepped onto the Expendables 2 set, everything changed. Cast members who had grown up watching him described the experience as moving, not because he demanded respect, but because he carried a calm authority that no box office hit could fake. He was simply the man they had always believed him to be. His scene, walking in alone, taking down enemies with quiet precision, delivering a line that nodded to his own myth, became one of the film's most celebrated moments. The audience erupted. The memes came back to life, and for a brief, shining moment, every chapter of his career came together in one perfect scene. After filming, Chuck returned to his life in Texas with his wife, Gina O'Kay. They had married in 1998, and by all accounts, she was the true center of his world. Gina, a former model, was not a Hollywood figure, but she was his partner, the mother of his twins, Danilee and Dakota, and the one person who knew him completely after decades of shared life. When Gina became seriously ill, Chuck did what he always did when something mattered. He showed up fully. Public appearances nearly stopped. His focus turned entirely to her care and recovery. The man who had played indestructible heroes for decades showed the real meaning of strength, not on a movie set, but in hospital rooms. Was he able to recover from the illness? Or did this moment lead to him passing away? Let's find out. Chuck Norris's final chapter. Then the losses began arriving in a different form. Quiet, personal, and profound. In 2024, Chuck Norris experienced the first of these losses in a way that no one else could fully understand. His mother, Wilma, passed away at the remarkable age of 103. She had been the bedrock of his life, the unwavering presence who had held their family together through the toughest storms, poverty that seemed unending, a divorce that threatened to splinter them, and moves that uprooted the familiar and planted uncertainty. Wilma was not just a mother. She was a force of nature, iron-willed, yet deeply faithful. A woman whose belief in her son became the invisible armor he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Though her passing was not unexpected given her long life, the grief it brought was no less raw. Chuck had always spoken of his mother with reverence and love that never faltered. She was the first person who had truly, unwaveringly believed in him. The one who saw in the boy from Ryan, Oklahoma, the potential to become more than the circumstances of his beginnings might suggest. Just a little over a year later, another goodbye came, one that echoed differently through the corridors of memory. Diane Holchek, Chuck's first wife and the high school sweetheart from Torrance, California, passed away in December 2025 at the age of 84. Diane was more than a chapter in his past. She was a living part of the foundation that had shaped his adult life. She was the mother of his sons, Mike and Eric, the girl he married at 17 while he himself was just 18, stepping into the Air Force and stepping into the responsibilities of adulthood all at once. Though their marriage eventually ended, the connection they shared as co-parents, as two people who had known each other from the very beginning, never faded. Diane's death marked the closing of a chapter that reached all the way back to the young man from Oklahoma, still finding his way, still learning what it meant to live, to love, and to grow. Then came March 10th, 2026. Chuck Norris turned 86. And as he had always done throughout his life, he marked the day not with ceremony or grand displays, but with action, the thing that had always defined him more than titles or accolades. On that day, a video appeared on his social media, showing him in Hawaii sparring with a partner. His movements were precise, fluid, and charged with energy that defied expectations of what a man of 86 could achieve. He moved with the grace of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering his body and spirit. At the end, he smiled at the camera, a spark of mischief in his eyes, and delivered the caption with the perfect timing of a man who had spent decades perfecting his sense of humor. "I don't age," he wrote. "I level up." It was classic Chuck, simple, confident, and true to himself. 9 days later, the world would lose him. On the morning of March 19, 2026, in Kauai, Hawaii, Chuck Norris suffered a sudden medical emergency. He was rushed to the hospital, and in those first critical hours, those closest to him, Yamin, reported that he remained alert, calm, and true to his nature, joking with staff, comforting those around him, showing no outward sign that the end was imminent. By the following morning, the news arrived that no one wanted to hear. His family confirmed his passing with a message posted to his Instagram account, a message as simple as it was devastating. "It is with heavy hearts that our family shares the sudden passing of our beloved Chuck Norris. He was surrounded by his family and was at peace. To the world, he was a martial artist, actor, and a symbol of strength. To us, he was a devoted husband, a loving father and grandfather, an incredible brother, and the heart of our family." The word struck with a quiet intensity. The heart of our family. Not the legend, not the action hero, not the Texas Ranger, not the man who had defeated every opponent the imagination could conjure. The heart of the family. In that choice, in that deliberate simplicity, his family told the world everything that mattered. Even in the days leading up to his passing, he had been living fully. At 86, he was still moving, still active, still embodying the values that had guided him his entire life. So, what do you think about Chuck Norris's final tribute? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.